all you nightmare nerds, and welcome to this week's episode of R.I.P. Reboots. Pennywise the Clown has been inspiring cases of calorophobia since the initial release of the miniseries It in 1990. 27 years later, the character made its return to the silver screen, scaring millions and leading to massive critical and box office success. How did these two versions stack up? Find out today on R.I.P. Reboots. Hello all you nightmare nerds, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of R.I.P. Reboots. This, like every week, is a very special episode. We are going to be talking about the intellectual property that launched my entire interest in horror, which is, of course, Stephen King's It. I know you've heard me talk about it before on the podcast in one way or the other, whether we were talking about the Stephen King Tours of Maine, spending time in Bangor, or just in general here on the podcast. We always like to bring in Stephen King because he's been such an influence to me over the years. So I know I've told this story before, but the first thing I want to kind of get into is the first time that I saw the original miniseries of Stephen King's It back when I was about 5 years old in 1995. So the original miniseries with Tim Curry and the great Tim Curry came out in 1990. And when I was younger, every weekend my dad would take me and my brothers and sisters to Blockbuster. We would get some sort of VHS and we would watch it. And even at the time, I was super into like movies and horror movies that I was not typically allowed to watch because I was the youngest of five. I think there's always that trickle-down effect from the parents where they're really concerned about like what the first few kids are like absorbing, and then it kind of gets to number 5 and they're like, you know what, he'll take care of himself, you know, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. That content's kind of like sifting through 5 different filters of other children. There's no way they're gonna let him watch what they're watching, right? Like there's got to be some sort of like level of screening. But fortunately for me, I took a very, very strong liking to horror early on. If you listen to the Tremors podcast, you know that like it kind of started with Godzilla movies. When I was really, really little, my dad would pick me up from preschool, take me to rent Godzilla VHSs, and that kind of turned into my interest in monster movies, which led to Tremors, my all-time favorite movie. But I'll never forget at the time, around, I would say 1995, 1996, so I was like right in that sweet spot of 5 to 6 years old. My sister, for whatever reason, went to Blockbuster and wanted to rent It on VHS, and I had never seen It before. But of course, I saw the cover and saw this kind of like terrifying clown, and you know, that very stark white image. And it was burned into my brain, and I was like, I need to watch this. Somehow, I don't know how, but I was able to make my way into the room with my older sister. My parents were not aware, or if they were, they didn't stop me. Maybe they even knew at the time. They were like, listen, Michael, he's going to be one of those horror nerds one day. So I make it in this room, and I watch this 3-hour epic that terrified me to my core. But at the same time, I was so obsessed with it, and I just wanted to keep watching it over and over and over again. And the reasons for this are things that we're going to talk about today, like why I think it connected to me at such a young age. And as the years progressed, I kind of became more obsessed with it. And if you have seen the Nightmare Network Instagram or all of our social medias, if you go on there and you look, the promo that I made for this episode was a picture of me at my kindergarten graduation, where my grandparents had asked me, hey, what do you want for kindergarten, your graduation? And I told them I want a copy of Stephen King's It on VHS so that I can watch it whenever I want. And my mom, God bless her, must have walked into a Suncoast Video, said to the guy behind the desk, like, hey, I'm looking for It. And so he takes her to this video, this VHS, sees that there's like a clown on the front, and she must be like, no wonder he wants to watch this. There's a clown on it. It's probably hilarious, totally appropriate for children. I love it because like all of that had to happen in order for me to be here today, and I think that's absolutely beautiful. And on a little more of a personal story, like I remember when I graduated 8th grade, somebody told my mom that I wanted, it was like an Under Oath t-shirt or something, because I was obviously we're into Screamo here at Nightmare Network, but so I ended up getting an Under Oath t-shirt for my 8th grade graduation, because my mom by herself, like in the early 2000s, walked into a Hot Topic by herself, talked to the guy behind the counter, and was like, my little boy, my little grandson, he wants this Under Oath shirt. That's what his mother told me. So lots of love going out to my mom, rest in peace. But I ended up getting kind of obsessed with this story, and I have these really great pictures of me at my kindergarten graduation with my grandparents and my family, like holding up my VHS copy of it like it was a trophy or something. And I remember specifically they were like, you really want to hold that and immortalize this image into the rest of your life? And I was like, abso-freaking-lutely do I want to do that. So the story has always kind of stuck with me for so many reasons, whether it be character, lived experiences. And later on in my life in high school was the first time I had read Stephen King's It. It's the book. It's my favorite book. It's been my favorite book since the time I read it. And I think the reason is there are so many themes of like growing older, loss of innocence, the bridge from childhood to adulthood, not even just emotionally, but also contextually, because something I think that the characters go through in the story is the struggle of dealing with the world as perceived as a child and the world as perceived as an adult. And we get these ugly instances of the town of Derry itself having to deal with a history of bigotry that's baked into the culture and history of the town that the kids are kind of unaware of until they grow older. And then when they grow older, they not only have to start accepting the loss of their innocence, but also accepting the horrors of the real world. And so, not to be too over dramatic about it, but I think high school is the point in time where that starts to happen for you, right? You're getting ready to take that next step from adolescence to adulthood, from high school to college, that first step from independence. And it's especially your senior year, right? It's almost like a bridge, to these 2 points in your life. And then once you get into college, certain things start to be more contextualized than, standardized kind of curriculums in high school, where you don't just learn about history, but you learn why it's significant, what social, cultural aspects kind of changed the way you perceive these events. So I was having this really, to me, I think, unique experience where art was imitating life, and and it had this salient effect on me specifically because it itself, the story, the original miniseries, was related directly to my childhood, and I had these beautiful memories of it. And so I think reliving them as I grew older during this bridge period from adolescence to adulthood had a really striking effect on me. And to me, that's why I don't think any other book can come close to what it had on me, because it was almost like I experienced these themes as they were meant to be experienced. I think the only other story that might have that kind of similar effect on me is The Shining, which is also from Stephen King. Definitely not as strong as it, but man, something about Steve, man, he just, I feel like he lived my life and now he's writing stories about it sometimes. And I think when you're able to find an author or a storyteller that kind of has that really deep relationship to you, it's easy to attach. And then there's a reason why sitting in my office I have Pennywise artwork and Dark Tower artwork, and I have a pop of Stephen King. Actually, it's a Stephen King pop of him as the shop owner in It Chapter 2, and I keep it right on top of my sticker box where I keep all of my podcasting tools and things. And oh, there it is, just fell down because I'm holding them right now. But I keep them right on top of that. So like whenever I'm sitting in my office trying to be creative, I take a look over at Steve. I say, thanks for all the inspiration. And then I turn over and I get to work. He's also sitting next to a pop of Mayor McCheese. I don't know how relatable that is, but I do have a cool pop of Mayor McCheese right next to him, just so you know. So moving on, 27 years later, Pennywise comes back, right? And he's on the silver screen, and they're making a blockbuster movie, and 26-year-old me is losing his absolute mind over it. And I remember my first experience with it was seeing that trailer that broke the internet, right? And it was so cool to me to watch this story that I love so much break stream records on YouTube for 24-hour releases of viewing, like for a movie trailer. And so leading up to that time, I had bought tickets to see it Thursday night at 7. I was going to be the first person to see this movie, at least in a wide-scale audience. So the first time available was Thursday night at 7. Went with all my buddies, and then I went and saw it again the next night, Friday night, with one of the same buddies. Went to see it Saturday by myself. And then went to see it as a little tasteful Sunday afternoon matinee. And it's funny because after I saw it the first time at 7 o'clock, I legitimately thought, I kind of want to buy another ticket right now to the 9:50 showing, go back in and just watch it again. Because that's how hype I was on it the first time. And then I knew I had three other viewings at least that weekend, so I didn't want to go too crazy. And then the following week I saw it Friday night again. So I maxed out at 5. I was gonna see it a 6th time. That might have been a little excessive, but we all know how obsessive I can be. And when it chapter 2 came out, I went. Similar, I went Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. The obvious reason for that is I feel that It Chapter 1 is the superior movie, but we are going to get into that very shortly. So we have these two kind of monoliths of story in me in my life that are kind of, coming up at two different points in my life. And so the question to me is, how do they stack up against one another? And why is one version more successful than the other? And the first thing I want to get into is I feel like this narrative, like there's a reason why people keep liking to return to it. There's a reason why, it was kind of the book to read in the 80s, and then when the miniseries came out, it had huge ratings, and then it became the largest grossing R-rated horror movie of all time when it got released, and I remember watching that box office climb and climb and climb. And to me, I think mostly what it is the characters of the Losers Clubs themselves. Obviously, Pennywise is a terrifying figure that haunts our nightmares, and I think his presence alone is something that could cause people to return to this story. But for me, it's really the characters of the Losers Club that provide a sense of connection to the narrative itself. And I think the reason is, at least myself, and I think I speak for a lot of people, I'm able to relate individually to almost every one of the Losers Club. And I think that's a really, really important, access point to this story of growing up and this story of how we perceive the world through different eras of our life. And another disclaimer I want to say, like before we kind of dive right into this, is I'm going to try really, really, really hard during this podcast not to get too book heavy. The book is my favorite book of all time. I've read it 5-6 times. It's a Bible of a book too. And I when I watch these stories, I tend to do this thing where I try to compare everything to the book and say, like, okay, well, this is why this doesn't succeed, and this is why that doesn't succeed, but this is why it succeeds in the book. And that's not what I want to do today. I really want to compare these two, isolated adaptations of the story and see how they stack up together. So I remember the first time watching the first few times watching the It miniseries back in the day, I was a chubby child, right? I was overweight throughout most of my life. I've struggled with my weight for most of my life, and I've learned to love myself because of it. or in spite of it as well. But the first person I was able to attach to was Ben, right? And this kind of experience he had of being isolated because of his weight, and everybody calling him fat boy, being picked on, being abused because he looked different, because of something that affected him that he couldn't necessarily help at the time as being a kid. And so watching that originally, I was immediately able to connect to that character and how he's experiencing these troubles of childhood, because it was something that I was going through right away. And I think that the reboot does a really great job of that too, because the first time we kind of experience Ben is when he meets Beverly Marsh, right? Like his ultimate crush, Beverly Marsh, and he has this awkward interaction with her where he doesn't say the right words. He's stumbling over himself, dropping everything. And I've had that same experience in my life so many times as a kid, where there was a girl I had such a crush on and didn't know what to do, how to react, what to say, because I felt this barrier between between my personality and my physical self, where I felt confident on the inside but couldn't express it towards the outside because of my weight. And you can tell that that's Ben, right? Ben in both stories has such a confidence, and he in the remake he's the historian, right? And he has this whole bedroom where he's so sure of himself. He's collecting all of these things, putting it on these walls. He's an interesting character, and he knows he has a love for learning. And in the original story, he's the one that brings everyone together to build the dam. And he has this unique personality, this attractive personality that he feels he's unable to completely embrace because of his weight. And so right immediately I have this access point to this character that anchors me towards the story. And from there, I think I'm able to spiderweb out to the other people and the other characters in that Losers Club. I'm able to relate to Bev because she has a history of family troubles, and growing up, I had a bit of a difficult family life sometimes with with my parents moving around a bunch, and so I'm able to kind of connect to the Bev character through that. Richie was a character I never thought I really would be able to connect to, and then the more you kind of learn about him, the more you realize that it's his insecurities that kind of drive him forward, right? And that he's this comic, and that he makes jokes as a defense mechanism because he's so self-conscious of his own talents, of his own abilities. And that's something, to me, I think probably later on in my life, I'm able to connect with more than anyone else, probably. I've been a musician. I'm trying to do this podcast, try to be a creative, and I have this second guessing of myself that regardless of anything that I accomplish, I always think it's not good enough. And so I'm a very sarcastic person, and I make these jokes as a defense mechanism so that I can hurt myself before other people do, and other people do. And I think that's really the heart of Richie. And it's something that the more I read the story, the more I watch the movies, I'm able to connect with so much more, especially like adult Bill Hader in part 2. Like he's such a perfect, like, oh my God, I'm so miserable like with what I'm like being an adult and having to make these jokes. And I think that's something that we all are able to really, really connect to. And I think that kind of goes along with Bill too, where he's a character that's experienced loss as a child, and I think that's something that a lot of people can connect to. And whether we experience loss of siblings, parents, pets, it's this unwanted forcing of experiences past your innocence that you're not ready for. And him being kind of the main character and coming, although I think the story does a good job of a great job. It's what makes it so great, of incorporating everyone's a protagonist at some point, which I think is great. Each character gets an opportunity to push the story, but at the end, it becomes Bill's story, right? That's where it starts. It starts with Georgie. It starts with his initial loss of innocence, which is his confrontation with death. And that's something that a lot of kids have to deal with and they have to face. And the story of Bill facing those demons and coming to terms with it throughout his life, I think is a really good access point to children or even teenagers or even adults who are first experiencing the story and wondering how to deal with their own grief that they weren't prepared for. So you have this cast of characters that are so unique and they're so original and they feel real, right? And Stephen King has always done an amazing part of making his characters feel real. And I've always said that there's this kind of stigma that Stephen King adaptations are never as good as the books. And the reason I feel that way is because Stephen King books are character driven. They're not narratively driven. And cinema being a visual medium, things have to happen constantly in order to push the story forward. It's not always the case, obviously. There are character driven pieces of cinema, but as a whole, cinematic language itself depicts that something needs to happen to push the story forward. And the narratives in Stephen King books themselves are really rooted in character-based narratives, not event-based narratives. So it becomes difficult to transfer that over to a visual medium if you're not awesome at it. And I think that there are certain filmmakers who kind of knock it out of the park, like Mike Flanagan and Frank Darabont, obviously the two big names there. But for specifically for it, it's these characters that are drawing you towards them because they're so fleshed out and they're so real, and they're not. It doesn't feel like they overlap in any way, and that you get a sense that they're cookie cutter. That they're so real. They represent different parts of our childhood that we experience individually, and yet they feel like whole humans at the same time. And that's always been something that's driven me to this story. Is these characters that bring me into it and keep me there. Even Henry Bowers, maybe more in the new one than the old one. Even though I think Henry Bowers is a great character in the original miniseries, you probably shouldn't be relating to him that much, aside from maybe adolescent anger that you're unable to control, which I think is a valid emotion that you should be able to kind of attribute to him. But in the remake, we're getting this view of abusive parenthood, of toxic masculinity, of unchecked mental health due to the lack of resources that were around him. And I think even these secondary, even violent characters provide you an insight into these different kind of experiences of childhood into adulthood. Now, where the two stories differ in terms of character, I think is really interesting, because to me, the OG miniseries, their character growth and strength really comes from individual narrative, whereas I think the point of the remake was really to focus on developing their characters as a group and as a form of togetherness. And the reason I say this is because the original miniseries has the function of overlaid a dual narrative that's cutting back and forth between 1990 and 1960 or 58 or so, which is the time frame of the original miniseries. And the way that they do it is they introduce each character first. You experience their lives, and then you experience their specific memories based on that summer, right? And that summer through flashback. And it becomes compartmentalized in that sense, whereas we're experiencing, each person gets to be their own individual for a set period of time, and we're able to learn about them individually, almost by themselves, versus where I think the strength of the first reboot is that it's not so much about individual experience and narrative as the first one, but it's about this group dynamic, and it's about how these characters are coming together. Not saying that that's not what's happening in the first one. Obviously, I think the kids section of the first one is really the strength of the original miniseries, but I think it does a great job of identifying them individually and then having them come together in that last, like really, really, truly come together as a whole pair towards the end when they're trying to have the the face off with Pennywise and the sores, whereas because it doesn't cut back and forth as much or at all in chapter 1 of the reboot, you're able to experience their first initial standoff with Pennywise in a linear fashion. And so you're not worried about cutting back and forth, providing context for these characters as adults. You're really focused on how they're coming together in the group narrative. And I think once they all come together, that's when you get kind of a better understanding of their characters and how they're interacting with one another versus the miniseries where it's almost how they're interacting with the modern world and how that modern world is a reflection of how they individually interacted with their childhood growing up in a small town of Maine in the late 50s, early 60s. The other character that I think it's interesting to see how they both do differently is the character of Derry the town and Derry the city. And to me, I think that's kind of a key towards the story. So the original miniseries takes place in Derry, Maine, in the late 50s, early 60s. And the reboot gives more of a modern time where it takes place in 1988, I believe, or 89, 88, the sweet spot of the late 80s. And the reason that they did this was obviously, number one, so that when they made chapter 2, which was the adults, it would be modern and it wouldn't be like we were watching, like they didn't want to make the adult story a 1990s story that was similar to the original miniseries and even the book. They wanted to modernize it to give us a better access point into into this story of childhood to adulthood, and it also makes more sense, from a marketing perspective, right? I think one of the reasons why this movie was so successful was because, number one, Stranger Things was very popular at the time, and if you don't know anything about Stranger Things, the Duffer Brothers actually made Stranger Things because they couldn't get the rights to make it for Netflix, so they decided to make their own kind of version of a Stephen King story set in that time. So the popularity of Stranger Things was coming. They even get Finn Wolfhard to be in it as Richie. And it's also the age demographic. The people who were going to be watching this mostly are the people that were watching the original as a kid when it came out in 1990. So providing this kind of additional, when they grow up, the audience is seeing themselves because that's where they're at in life. And when they're watching the movie, they're watching their own experiences of childhood because that demographic, that specific demographic they're trying to pull from, they were experiencing childhood at the same time. So, but I think looking at Derry as a character between both timelines is really cool because in that original miniseries, the children's story takes place in the late 50s, early 60s. And historically, that was a time of the development of small town America. We were moving towards the civil rights movement. It was a time of unrest where historical representations of bigotry in white small town America were really coming to the forefront. And in the book, it's represented by different things like the murder at the Black Spot, which you find out, which was a mass slaughter of black stationed veterans in Derry 30 years before, and all the events leading up to that, and you're experiencing this bigotry towards Mike and his father at his farm, where they're consistently being harassed by local farmers because of the color of their skin. His dad ends up taking Mike to a jail cell where they find this thing called a vagrant chair, which is something really something that was real, where small towns would make vagrants sit in it, and it was like it's a chair with bumps in it, and for 2 days nonstop, that it would be so uncomfortable they'd be begging for them to get them out so they could get out of the town. And so we have this historical context of unrest in this town moving towards the civil rights movement, and that's kind of where that framework is. And so you're watching these kids experience this kind of transition as they're moving through their lives, versus in the book, but also in the movie. And I know we're trying to not make book references, but it comes from the mid to late 80s, and that was also a time of civil unrest, specifically with the AIDS crisis and the way in which the homosexual community was being portrayed as well as discriminated against at the time. In the book, it was shown through the murder of Adrian Mellon, which I absolutely love that they included that in it chapter 2, because it shows you, it gives you a character of this town, and through that I think that the reboots really win Derry as a character. If we're stacking them up, if we're trying to see which one's a win-win, because you have this really experience of a town that doesn't care about specific problems going on within it. And this is shown really beautifully through cinematography, where Ben's having his stomach carved open on the kissing bridge, and a car with a group of elderly citizens drives by. They stare over and they look back, and that balloon pops up. And to me, part of what Pennywise is that decay of small town America, that hate that's historically ingrained into small town America, and they're experiencing it on the front lines. Things like changing Mike's backstory of his parents who were killed in a fire that was a result of a hate crime. It's giving more character to this town that these kids are living in. The town itself is a reflection of our American society at that time. And so I think that the remakes, or the reboots, I should say, really do a better job of reflecting that kind of small town discriminatory culture. And though the original does a fine job of it, and there's specifically that scene where the boys are harassing Bev, and the old man kind of goes inside. I think contextually as well as metaphorically, the newer ones do a better job of showing the town of Derry and how evil and how dirty it really is. So chalk that one up to the reboots, because I think that's where that one really takes a win. Where I think the original miniseries takes the cake for me is terms of actual scenes that terrified me. So when I was first watching this as a little kid, I loved my baths, and I still do, like I'll take bubble baths and read in the tub, that's my kind of my happy place. But growing up, I just loved baths. I loved the environment of the bathroom, and the sound of the fan and the nice warm water and being clean with the bubbles. And so there's the scene in the original It where Eddie goes into the showers at school, and Pennywise forces his way up through the drain, and he does his hands pop through, and he pushes the drain back, and it crumbles, and it's the effect is so cool, especially for the time. That terrified me as a little kid, because I loved taking baths, and it ruined baths for me. I would stare at the drain the whole time and be please, I was afraid I was going to see two fingers pop up through that drain and smush it back, and I would be sucked down into the drain with Pennywise. He would grab me and take me down. And that scene, it terrified me as a kid. And the end battle in the sewer, it I think has to go to the original miniseries as well. That there's a specific shot that I'm thinking of where it's a close up on Stan, and they're all holding hands. So they're all linked in the source, so that they can't get taken by Pennywise or separated. And it's a 360 handheld shot that goes around Stan while he's saying his mantra, do my job, do my best, do my duty, guard my country. And when it stops, he lifts up his hand, and you see the person that was holding it that we just saw in the first Revolution is now Pennywise's hand. And to me, that also was terrifying. It's a terrifying practical effect where it's very effective, and all it does is show you that Pennywise can manipulate reality, right? He can come in there and create space between these people in order to take stand. And to me, that was something that was really, 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 really terrifying. The new one, though, I guess scary. I don't know. This might be a little biased, because I feel like I've gotten to a point in my life where I've seen so many horror movies that movies don't really scare me anymore. I appreciate the construction of a scare and the construction of horror, the themes and the aesthetic of it. But there's only a few movies recently that I'm really like, oh, I'm actively scared right now. And I didn't feel that way at all during the first It. I think I was mostly just absolutely thrilled out of my mind. Like, I don't know how I could have possibly been scared, because like the serotonin valve was just on full open in my brain. I was more happy than anything else to just be experiencing this, right? And so, but the one thing I will give the new one that it takes the cake by far is the sewer scene with Georgie. So when we first see it in the original miniseries, we're first introduced to Tim Curry, and he is absolutely terrifying the entire time. And I think what works well with Bill Skarsgård's version of it, at least at first, is that his Pennywise is a little more approachable. I think Tim Curry, like, regardless of who he is at any point in time, even if he's trying to be like, I'm a happy, positive clown, is inherently terrifying. Bill Skarsgård, I think, edges Curry out in terms of approachability, which is a weird thing I never thought I would have to say. But Bill Skarsgård's Pennywise is way more approachable than Tim Curry's. We're going to say that. And so I guess I'm able to believe that scene a little bit more, because I could see a kid having this conversation with this like Winnie the Pooh voiced clown who got blew away into the sewer, right? And so versus Tim Curry, who, like, if I saw that thing on the street, even if I saw Tim Curry's Pennywise in the proper context of a circus, I would run screaming. Like, there's in no way is he like ever approachable, except for maybe that first time you see him, where he waves through the sheets at the first girl, where you're like, oh, there's a smile, and then it's never the same again, regardless of when you see him. But and I think the way that scene that I'm gonna murder Georgie scene works so well the second time around is because because it's an R rating, because it's a movie, not a miniseries for TV, you're able to see more. And the thing about the story of it is, obviously, it's very violent towards children, and I think that's what makes it a really terrifying and visceral experience, because in these kind of stories, especially in Hollywood, they tend to take kids' glove towards stories. They have kids' gloves towards kids in stories. And even if kids do die, it's never graphic. It's always off screen. And the first time you watch him tear that arm out of its socket, and Georgie clawing his way, bleeding from his arm, it puts you immediately are like, oh my God, this is the movie that we're watching. Okay, you know that they're not going to hold back punches. And I think that's so important to the story, because the story is supposed to be how growing up and how the world can be brutal towards these kids. And I don't think you get that in the original miniseries. I think it's terrifying, because especially I think that the teeth on Pennywise in the original with Tim Curry is really scary, and his delivery is super scary. But the scene itself is so much more effective when you're able to view that violence, because that violence is not gratuitous. It's part of a theme. It's part of this theme of the horrible experiences that these kids are having growing up, and that sets the tone for the rest of the movie. So if we're chalking up wins and losses, Georgie murder scene, that goes to the remake as well. So I think so far we've talked a lot about the first parts, which is the kids parts, which I think almost unanimously people feel are better. In the original miniseries, the way that the characters are built and how it's interlaced with their adults, how you're seeing reflections of their personalities in two different times, is really what brings that story together, and it makes it really, really great and really fantastic. In the first part of the reboots, you're given a linear timeline of those same events that doesn't cut back and forth, and it's able to give more time towards the children. It's able to allow them to interact with each other and make the Losers Club more of a group experience and something that we're able to connect to. It becomes our group of friends. The main knocks on both of these, I guess, iterations would be the second half. And I think that's really interesting because though we're not trying to talk in the books, I know. In the books, I love the adult story so much because it provides such interesting and unique content or context to the children because we're able to see these children and how they've started versus how the adults are developing and how they developed and where they've ended up. And I think returning to your hometown is such a salient, it's such a strong theme that we all experience one way or another. Even if we never leave our town, I think as we grow up, we always have different perceptions of it and how our childhood is relating to our adult self. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I am totally giving part 2, the adults, even though I think the cast of the reboot is out of this world. Like, Bill Hader knocks Richie out of the park. It's perfectly cast. Like, Jessica Chastain was meant to be an adult Beverly Marsh. I love James Ransone. Like, when I found out he was adult Eddie, I lost my mind because I couldn't have imagined anybody else like more perfect. I think the adult cast of Chapter 2 is what pushes that movie forward, regardless of all of its failings. The failings of Part 2 for the reboot to me are really about a few things. One being it becomes formulaic, drawn out, and they wanted to. The first one was so popular, and the child actors were so popular as a part of it. I felt like they tried to shoehorn the de-aged child actors into the narrative, which was a little terrifying because they did not look great. But they tried to shoehorn them in there because they wanted to kind of capitalize off of that popularity. And so we're given these walking tours, I guess, where once they start to split up, the movie itself becomes more individual, which I don't think which was great about the first one, but not about. It was great about the first miniseries, but not about the newer one, which is cool because I think they're kind of opposite. Where in the original miniseries, the first part, the character development of the Losers Club is individualized, whereas in the second part, they all come together and it's more about their group experience. In the reboot, I think the first one is about building the Losers Club together in terms of character, how they're interacting with each other, whereas they purposely separate them in Chapter 2 for like most of the movie. It is really, really long, and though I want as much content as I possibly can, it doesn't need to be that long. The second Chapter 2 becomes so bloated and formulaic. It becomes person goes to place, has flashback, comes back, Pennywise there, jump scare, rinse, repeat 6 times. And that's a shame to me because the adult story in the book and even in the original is really well constructed and really well interlaced. The fact that Tom Rogen and Bill's Audra don't come into this was something really depressing to me because that narrative really, them also returning to the town really kind of pushed that story forward and allow the losers to come together in different ways. And it's not included at all, obviously, because it felt like it went more towards jump scares than narratives in the second part of It Chapter 2. Which I think hurt the story a lot, especially Henry Bowers. Henry Bowers in the OG and in the story itself in the book, he has a great coming home story too, and I feel like he was a non-factor in It Chapter 2 to the point where he didn't even need to be included. Though, I will say, best cameo in It Chapter 2 was Donnie from Blue Mountain State showing up as an orderly at the insane asylum at Juniper Hills, where adult Henry Bowers is. So, shout out to you, all you Blue Mountain State fans. Go Goats. So, I honestly didn't think I was going to have this take when I rewatched them, but the second half of the first miniseries, though it gets a lot of hate, mostly because of the terrible spider, like the puppet spider that happens at the end, I think is really, really, really good. It hits on every emotional level that I think you want it to. Especially there's this scene where Bill walks out of the hotel after Henry Bowers is killed and they've all decided to give up. and he hears this sign from the universe, right? This fleur-de-lis that's playing in the hotel lobby, which was the last song that his mother played on piano before Georgie died. It was when Georgie went out. And he gives this really amazing speech about how he can't give up and them coming together. And it hits on an emotional level, even in that just one scene that I don't think happens once in the in It Chapter 2. It Chapter 2, it became that scare fest. It became that jump scare fest. And then they try to make it emotional in the last half an hour. I think the second half of the miniseries succeeds because it's less horror-based and more drama-based. It becomes about these characters coming together and re-experiencing this relationship that they had as children. And I think even in terms of scares, it's more effective in that way because it's atmospheric. For example, the Chinese restaurant scene in the reboot, it's very kind of over the top with CGI and it's less personal because of it. Whereas it's simpler in the second part of the miniseries because each person has one shell. It becomes designed towards their specific personality. Effective practical effects. It's simple. It provides atmosphere. It doesn't provide chaos or jump scares. So in that way, I feel like the second half of the miniseries is really effective at bringing these characters together in the context of the story, whereas It Chapter 2 does not succeed. So we're going to give Chapter 2, or I should say the second part of the miniseries, that wins out over It Chapter 2. I'm sorry. Unfortunately, I'm not a fan of It Chapter 2 because of the ending. And here's why. Okay, listen. I've been saying it the entire time that we're not going to talk about how this relates to the books. However, I'm going to do it right now because the ending of the book, they do this thing called the Ritual of Chud, and it is a metaphysical battle through the ends of our reality that is buried under under Derry and like at the brink of our reality. Whereas the Deadlights exist in if you're Dark Tower fans, the Deadlights, which is Pennywise's non-physical form, exists in the Toadash darkness, which is just outside of our reality. And his reflection in our reality, his physical form, is that of the spider. But it can, I should say, her physical form is the spider. And in the books, they have this metaphysical, both as kids and as adults, they have this metaphysical battle with the cosmic spider where Bill is thrown into the darkness and has to compete in a battle of wills to get back. And, he sees the turtle and people are like, well, why is there a giant metaphysical turtle in this book? So it's very trippy and it's very out there. It's perfect for the book. And obviously in the OG miniseries, they were not going to do that, right? It turned into a let's punch a puppet spider as much as we can, which to me kind of takes the fear and the point away. Like if this thing is physical, then you can hurt it. The whole point of it as a being is that it can't be killed that way. Like you need to defeat it through metaphysical means first. I'm not going to hold that against the 1990 miniseries on TV that they weren't able to give me, like existential dread of a void out in darkness where a metaphysical cosmic spider and entity exists. Not going to hold that against it. They punched a puppet spider really hard. It was great for what it was. Loved it. All right, great. The reason I'm so jaded on It Chapter 2 is because when It Chapter 1 was a huge success, the filmmakers, Andy Muschietti and Gary Dauberman and Barbara Muschietti were like, okay, listen, we made a lot of money, which means that we are allowed to get kind of more creative and crazy with Chapter 2. We're gonna do the Ritual of Chud. And when I heard that, I lost my mind because I wanted a weird movie. Like I wanted a crazy, weird second part. I wanted something different. I didn't want let's go punch a spider or let's go hit a clown. I wanted that metaphysical cosmic. I've said it before. I'm mad because I'm never going to get a metaphysical battle with a cosmic spider. And so I'm jaded against you filmmakers for promising me I was going to get a metaphysical battle with a cosmic spider, and I did not get a metaphysical battle with the cosmic spider. Instead, what I got is more let's run away from a giant physical spider, weird looking Pennywise spider, and we're going to bully shame him at the end, and that's how it ends. Which teaches us, of course, that you can solve all of your problems with bullying. Please don't do that. That is not how you want to solve your problems. But it bothers me because I was promised that, and they even, like, Ritual of Chute is even part of the story in Chapter 2. They're trying to find these memory totems to do the Ritual of Chute so that they can overcome it, and they tell us they're going to do it the whole time. And then at the end, there's literally a sentence that Pennywise says, and he's like, yeah, you know this isn't real, right? He's like, oh, did you really think that was going to work? That's the writers giving you a middle finger for believing that they were going to do what they said they were going to do. So F you at Chapter 2. I do not appreciate your ending. It was bad, and it ruined it. So anyway, but I remember reading a review when it came out saying that someone was writing a review for It Chapter 2, and it said, like, you know, overall it's great. The chemistry between the characters is really great, which is true. Like I said, the strength of the second of Chapter 2 is its cast. But when it comes to the ending, the reviewer said, as for the ending, well, that's the ending of the book. So what are you going to do? Except it's not the ending of the book. Like, the ending of the book is not them fighting a spider. Like, yes, there is a giant spider, but that's not what it is. It's a battle of wills of overcoming, like, your own mortality of this trippy, like Doctor Strange, like, Into the Void type of fight, like 30 years before that movie even came out. And that's what I wanted to see. Like, I wanted to see something weird. I wanted to see something unique. And what I got was them being chased around, you know, by a spider. And they were able to experience those memories through their different kind of, you know, memory doors that they go through. But, you know, any severity and gravity of the situation is often undermined in that movie by a joke. So you have those doors like the scary, not scary, scary, very scary. And there's the dogs. And though it's fun, like, I'm not going to say it's not funny. I do enjoy it, but it takes the seriousness away from it. And that is something else that Chapter 2 really has something working against it, is this insistence of it being part comedy. So because of all this, miniseries, that takes the cake for Chapter 2. Miniseries wins Chapter 2. So I could talk every day about it, why I love it, why I'm going to continue to love it, while I'm praying for a sequel book, which I'm almost convinced is going to happen because Pennywise has been showing up more frequently in books set in Derry and in Maine. So fingers crossed that one of those eggs was not killed and we get a sequel. But this is one of my favorite stories of all time. It's something that draws me back. The themes of childhood, of returning home, of experiencing the world in different contexts as you're growing up. This loss of innocence, this exposure to a harsh world. And it's something that it's the reason why I think this story continues to be relevant and continues to be adapted. And I'm sure in 27 years we're going to have another It adaptation. Maybe this time they'll actually give me a metaphysical battle with a cosmic spider. Fingers crossed. But I want to end with this podcast with thinking, like, what could the future be in terms of story? If we were to be given another Pennywise story, I think it's interesting because we could approach it as the different iterations of the cycle. Like, what if we were to see an It during the kitchen, the set during the Kitchener fireworks explosions, a historical movie about Derry where it's constantly popping up. Maybe about a real historian doing a story on Pennywise and having him recur over 3 generations of his life, as a kid, as an adult, as a senior. I think that would be something really cool, and that's kind of where I want to see a story go if we're ever fortunate enough to see a book sequel. Like, the first It was about these experiences from adolescence to adulthood, and how I want to know how Stephen King thinks we're experiencing these same things from adulthood to seniority to the ever approaching time of death, and how we kind of see these themes through that lens. So for me, I think this is a story that can continue to keep going, and I'm going to end with my official ranking in terms of parts 1 and parts 2. The winner goes to It Chapter 1. the 2017 remake. It hits on so many important levels, which is the embracing the group, the kind of the terrifyingness of Pennywise, having Pennywise being able to change into different facets of fear, which I think is missing in the first miniseries. The chemistry between the kids, this theme of Derry as a town of this dark underworld of small town America, I think it hits on all cylinders. And when I watch It Chapter 1, like it doesn't feel like a popcorn movie to me. It feels like a film. Like it has a feeling of highbrow, which I think is cool because this story definitely has enough going for it that it can feel like art. And I love that about that experience. Similar reasons, it's going to go part one of the original miniseries. The introspective individual looks at the characters and how they come together eventually towards the end, as well as some amazing scares, including that shower scene, which to me is the fuel of nightmares. That's why Chapter 2, that's why the first part of the miniseries is going to take that second spot. Second part of the OG miniseries is going to take the third spot. As I've said, the character, how they come together, how they interact is just more emotional, and it hits on so many more thematic levels than it does with what'll take the last spot, It Chapter 2. I'm sorry, I just can't forgive you of that ending. I will still watch it to make me happy that it even exists in the first place, but whoever's making this adaptation in 27 years, whether it's me or someone else, give me a metaphysical battle with the cosmic spider. So, do you agree with my rankings? Did you have fun today? Is there something I missed that you want me to talk about in a future episode? Like I think I could probably do 500 It podcasts, and where we could bring the book more in and have more fun with that. So let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much for joining me on another special episode of one of my favorite stories of all time. We'll scare you later. Thanks for tuning in to Season 2 of Nightmare Network. Remember to like and subscribe and follow us on our Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for updates regarding all things terrifying. Is there a movie or TV series you want us to talk about on our podcast? DM us and let us know. Remember, here at Nightmare Network, you share your scares.